Hey guys, welcome back to the video. I'm Luke, an ACA qualified accountant, having passed all 15 of my exams at the first attempt while studying at a Big Four firm. And after my time at the Big Four, I transitioned into a career within investment banking, and I now spend my days helping current ACA candidates smash their exams. And in today's video, we're going to discuss the Business Technology and Finance certificate level exam. The Business Technology and Finance exam is one of 6 certificate level exams that you'll come across on your ACA journey. It's an entirely multi-choice based exam, so you'll be presented with 50 questions worth 2 marks each, and you'll need to complete the paper within 90 minutes. I would say this is one of the more straightforward ACA certificate level exams, given it's entirely multi-choice and there's no long-form scenario-based question like you find in accounting or principles of tax. This exam is generally considered to be quite intuitive. The concepts are quite straightforward, and if you have any kind of background in business, accounting, finance, economics, I think you'll find the material here is quite straightforward. There's quite a lot of learning that you need to do and quite a lot of memorization, but it's not one of the more challenging exams at this level of the qualification. And candidates doing well in this exam is definitely reflected in the pass rate. The BTF exam has a 90% pass rate, so generally speaking, the majority of candidates that sit this paper do pass. So if you are a little bit worried about it, don't be too stressed. It does have one of the highest pass rates on the qualification, so candidates that sit this exam generally go on to ace it. And in this video, I'm going to run through some tips and some advice to help you pass this exam. We're going to focus on some strategies to focus your study and revision schedule, and then we'll discuss some tips to help you in the actual exam itself. So yeah, let's get started. My first piece of advice when it comes to the Business Technology Finance exam is what you should do in terms of your revision strategy. Now, what I would say about this exam is that it requires a lot of memorization. It's a bit different from the likes of accounting, management information, and principles of tax, because those exams, you need to have a really deep understanding of the material. You need to understand the underlying concepts and then be able to apply those different concepts to the scenarios that you're presented with, both in terms of the multi-choice and their long-form scenario-based question. And those exams are quite calculation heavy too. Whereas in BTF, there aren't really any concepts that you need to learn. It's an exam where you just need to memorize a lot of facts and a lot of information. And given that there is a lot of memorization involved with BTF, I do strongly recommend using flashcards when you're doing your studying and your revision, and stay away from long form note taking. When you go through the workbook, jot down the key facts, the key definitions, the key ideas onto flashcards, and you can use those flashcards later when it gets to your revision phase to help you learn and memorize the material. What I don't recommend is just reading it passively and making long form notes. That's not really going to help aid your revision here. When it comes to this exam, you need to be a lot more active with your learning, hence why I recommend flashcards, because that's going to help you memorize as many of the facts within the workbook as you possibly can. There aren't really any concepts that you need to develop a deep understanding of. This is much more of a learn and churn kind of exam. So in the initial study phase, do not write long form notes. Keep everything short and punchy. Get your flashcards ready, because you can use them in your revision phase to really help you memorize everything. Flashcards are perfect here. They're what I use when I study the exam, and it really helps you just learn as much as you possibly can within a short time frame. My second piece of advice when it comes to the Business Technology Finance exam is to prioritize question practice. So, you've been through the workbook once, you've produced a hell of a lot of flashcards that you're going to be able to use in your revision phase. Now is the time to put the workbook to one side and transition on to questions. So you want to be doing the end of chapter questions and the question bank questions as soon as possible after you've gone through the workbook. Question practice is really where you're going to be able to add deeper layers to your knowledge and to your understanding over and above what you've accumulated having gone through the workbook and having produced your flashcards. This exam is, generally speaking, pretty intuitive. If you have any general business or finance or economics understanding, then you should pick up these concepts pretty quickly. The ideas and theories covered in this exam are focused on those general finance areas. They're pretty high level, pretty easy to pick up. So if you do have any background knowledge or any interest in those areas, then this exam should be quite straightforward for you. Start prioritizing question bank questions as soon as possible and get into mock exams ASAP. And then once you're going through your question bank and you're going through mock exams and you're identifying areas that you are a bit weaker on, it's at that point that you can go back to the workbook and start to refine your knowledge and build up your understanding in that area. Getting into the question bank early will give you an ample amount of time to be able to identify the areas within the syllabus that you're good at and also those areas that you're not so good at. And then you can spend the rest of your revision phase focusing in and getting better at your weaker areas. My third piece of advice when it comes to doing well in the BTF exam is to not neglect the technology component of business, technology, finance. So the technology element is actually a relatively new element to the exam. When I studied it, it was just called business finance. There was no technology component. The technology component is pretty new. It comprises around 15% of the exam weighting. And the ICAEW introduced technology to cover topics such as big data, information assimilation, data security, and all of these sort of new world issues that business professionals and accountants are facing on a day-to-day basis. And what the ICAEW makes super clear in their material is that they are examining this area heavily at the moment because it's a new area and they know students will likely neglect it. Make sure you put a lot of emphasis into the technology component of the material in your revision phase because the ICAEW are making clear that they want to test it, they're spotting that students are neglecting it, and it does make up 15% of the exam weighting, so it is pretty material. If you get 15 out of 15 on that section of the material, you're in a pretty strong position to pass, particularly given that other students are likely not going to get 15 out of 15 based on the ICAEW's guidance. So make sure you go through all of the technology-based questions in the question bank twice or even 3 times to make sure you're super comfortable with that component of the exam. And if you can master this part of the course, you can easily bank 15 marks and be well on your way to passing the paper. My next piece of advice when it comes to doing really well in the business, technology, finance certificate level exam is to not neglect the corporate governance and responsibility section of the material. Now, the ICAEW say that the corporate governance and responsibility section of the BTF exam comprises 10% of the paper, but I remember when I sat my exam, I'm sure around 30 to 40% of the questions exclusively focused on corporate governance and responsibility. So it felt like a much bigger weighting than the ICAEW suggested. This section of the material is pretty boring and pretty painful to learn. I remember when I studied it having to stay up late and learn all these dull facts and dull ideas, but it's really important to passing the paper. The ICAEW will naturally allocate more exam questions to areas of the syllabus that they know that candidates either struggle with or neglect in their studying and in their revision. And this is definitely one of those areas where candidates find it quite boring and don't really want to put in the hard yards to learn all of the facts and definitions and ideas. So with that in mind, you need to focus in on this area and double down here because it's going to come up, it's going to be tested heavily, and if you can do well in it, then you have an unfair advantage because you know that other candidates aren't going to do that well. When I sat my exam, I remember distinctly there being about 10 to 15 questions focused on this area of the syllabus. So it felt very significant and it really felt like the ICAEW wanted to test you on it. And candidates that do neglect this area do struggle. It will come up, so do spend around half a day during your study and revision phase focusing on corporate governance. My final piece of advice when it comes to doing well in the business, technology, finance exam is to apply real world knowledge. So don't be afraid to use common sense and bring in outside business and finance knowledge to answer questions in this exam. The questions often involve scenarios where you need to respond to a certain business situation or business challenge. The options can often feel quite similar and it's quite difficult to distinguish right from wrong when you go through the 4 options in the multi-choice question. You may find that you're often quite unsure what to put down as the right answer to an exam question, but don't be afraid to lean back on any real world knowledge that you have about business, finance, or economics coming into the exam, but also just common sense. when it comes to answering questions. Keep up to date with current news and current affairs while you're studying towards this exam. I know you don't have very long to study towards it, but it can really help to retain a lot of the knowledge and a lot of the ideas in this module, because there is definitely a link between business, technology, finance and the real world. It's not purely theoretical. A lot of the ideas capture what's going on in the real world, in the financial space, in the accounting space, in the economic sphere. Do feel free to lean back on any outside knowledge that you bring in when you walk into the exam, and do apply common sense where relevant. Cool, so that's my advice for doing well in the ACA certificate level business, technology, finance exam. I hope you found all the tips in this video helpful. This exam is pretty straightforward. It's definitely not one of the more challenging exams you're going to encounter at the certificate level. You're definitely going to find harder papers elsewhere. Accounting, MI, principles of tax, in my opinion, are all more challenging than this exam. Focus in on the core topic areas. Use flashcards to help aid your memorization and learn the concepts. Get into the question bank nice and early so you get ample time to attack questions and hone your exam approach, and get exposure to applying the content you are learning to scenarios. This isn't one of the more time-pressured exams you're going to face on the qualification. I would say that most candidates finish their first run through of this paper within around 55-60 minutes, so it's definitely not an exam you need to rush. And again, this is supported by the fact that it's pure multi-choice, this exam. There's no long-form scenario-based question to weigh you down. Take time to think about the answers, go through each of the 4 options and identify which of the options you think is correct, but also which of the 4 options you think are incorrect, because this will help justify your selection. Go through your exam a second time to make sure you're happy with all your selections and you haven't made any silly mistakes and haven't lost out on any easy marks when you are under pressure, when you were going through the exam in your first run through. Going through a paper a second time can really help bring clarity to what you've done and what answers you've put down on the paper. You can flag any questions you're unsure of, so do feel free to flag questions as you're going through and come back to them on your second read through. Looking at a question for a second time, I always found, can give you a much clearer picture as to what's right and what's wrong. If you found this video helpful, please smash the like button and consider subscribing. I'm making tons of videos regarding the ACA qualification, tips and advice videos for each of the 15 exams. And I'm also making courses for all of the papers. So if you want to come along on this journey with me, it'd be great to have you on board. And if you do have the exam coming up, I wish you the best of luck for it. You're going to absolutely smash it. And I'll see you guys in the next video.